March 21st, 1937, Palm Sunday, Berlin. The morning air was sharp with the scent of spring rain and danger. Across Germany, in thousands of Catholic churches, priests unfolded sheets of paper that had arrived in sealed envelopes only hours before. Their hands trembled. The Gestapo had already begun intercepting mail. If caught with these documents, imprisonment was certain. But on this morning, something unprecedented happened. In every diocese, in every parish, from village chapels in Bavaria to cathedrals in the Rhineland, priests stood before their congregations and began to read. The words were Latin at the title mit brennender Sorge, with burning concern, but what followed was German, clear, uncompromising, and aimed directly at the heart of the Nazi state. The voice of Pope Pius XI thundered from 10,000 pulpits: whoever exalts race, or the people, or the state, above their standard value, and divinizes them to an idolatrous level, distorts and perverts an order of the world, planned and created by God. In Berlin, the capital of the Reich, Bishop Konrad von Preysing stood in his cathedral and read those words himself. He knew what they meant. He had helped write them. Joseph Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda minister, received word before noon. His reaction was volcanic. The Gestapo scrambled to confiscate every copy. Printing presses were raided. Priests were arrested. But it was too late. The document had reached millions. And the man who had helped craft it, the aristocratic bishop standing in the shadow of the Reich Chancellery itself, had just declared war on Adolf Hitler. What the Nazis didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that this was only the beginning. Konrad von Preysing had been born into a world that no longer existed. The son of a Bavarian count, raised in a castle in the countryside near Munich, he had grown up surrounded by the rituals of Catholic nobility, faith, duty, honor. His family's lineage stretched back centuries. Servants called him Herr Graf. The future seemed ordained. Perhaps diplomacy, perhaps military service, perhaps a quiet life managing ancestral estates. But the young count felt a different calling. In 1912, at the age of 32, Konrad von Preysing was ordained a priest. It was an unusual path for a nobleman. His family accepted it with grace, though some wondered why a man of his station would choose the collar over the sword. They would learn the answer decades later. In Hitler's Germany, the collar would prove more dangerous than any sword. He rose through the church quietly. A parish priest, a canon, a theological advisor. In 1932, he was named Bishop of Eichstätt, a small Bavarian diocese far from the political storms gathering in Berlin. It seemed like a peaceful appointment. It wasn't. 1 year later, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. The darkness descended. At first, many in the church believed they could negotiate. The Vatican signed a concordat with the new regime in 1933, hoping to protect Catholic institutions. Some bishops praised Hitler's anti-communism. Others stayed silent, trusting that the storm would pass. Preysing trusted nothing. From his diocese in Eichstätt, he watched as Jewish businesses were boycotted, as books were burned, as the first concentration camps opened. He read the party newspapers with their venom against enemies of the state. He saw how the regime's ideology, blood, soil, race, contradicted everything the gospel taught about human dignity. And he began to speak. In private letters to Rome, he warned that compromise was impossible. In meetings with fellow bishops, he urged resistance. Most of his colleagues counseled caution. Preysing counseled conscience. In 1935, Rome made a decision that would change his life forever. The Vatican needed someone strong in Berlin, someone who would not bend, someone who could stand in the heart of the Reich and represent the church without flinching. They chose Konrad von Preysing. The appointment was both an honor and a sentence. Berlin was the most dangerous diocese in Germany. Gestapo headquarters stood blocks from the bishop's residence. Every sermon was monitored, every visitor noted, every letter potentially intercepted. The bishop would live under constant surveillance, a man of faith surrounded by wolves. Preysing accepted without hesitation. What he found in Berlin horrified him. The Nazi grip on the capital was total. Party flags hung from every building. Brown shirts marched in the streets. Jewish neighbors were disappearing. And in the church itself, Some priests had begun incorporating Nazi symbols into their services, hoping to survive through accommodation. Preysing gathered his clergy in his first weeks. His message was simple. There would be no swastikas in Catholic churches. There would be no compromises with ideology that denied the image of God in every human being. The gospel was not negotiable. Some priests wept with relief. Others shifted nervously, knowing what such words could cost. Among those who listened was a man named Bernhard Lichtenberg, provost of the Berlin cathedral. He was older than Preysing, white-haired, soft-spoken, with the gentle manner of a village pastor. But behind that gentleness was steel. Lichtenberg had already begun something dangerous. Every evening, after the last Mass, he remained in the cathedral and prayed aloud. His prayers were simple and devastating. "Let us pray," he would say, his voice echoing through the empty nave, "for the Jews and for the poor prisoners in the concentration camps." In Nazi Berlin, such words were treason. Preysing knew. He did not order Lichtenberg to stop. Instead, he protected him. He gave him cover. He made clear that the cathedral provost acted with episcopal authority. The bishop understood something that many of his contemporaries did not. Heroism needed protection. Those willing to take the greatest risks needed someone above them who would shield them, absorb the pressure, and take responsibility when the Gestapo came asking questions. That was his role, not the dramatic gesture, the quiet shield. As the years passed, he built a network. Margarete Sommer was a Catholic social worker, brilliant and tireless. In 1941, Preysing appointed her to lead a new office within the diocese, the Hilfswerk beim Bischöflichen Ordinariat, Berlin, the relief office of the Episcopal Authority. Its official purpose was charitable work. Its real purpose was rescue. Sommer's operation was remarkable in its scope. Under Preysing's protection, her office gathered intelligence on deportations, tracked the fate of baptized Jews and mixed families, and when possible, helped people escape. Forged documents, hidden safe houses, connections to convents and monasteries where the hunted could find refuge. How many lives? The records are incomplete. Historians estimate at least 3,000 people passed through the network's hands. 3,000 human beings who lived because a bishop said yes and a woman named Margarete Sommer refused to look away. The Gestapo suspected. They always suspected. But Preysing was careful. His aristocratic bearing, his diplomatic connections, his precise language created a protective shield. He gave orders that were never written down. He covered tracks. He ensured that if the network was discovered, the trail would not lead directly to his door. It was not cowardice. It was strategy. A dead bishop could save no one. An imprisoned bishop could not protect his priests. Preysing intended to survive and to ensure his people survived so that the work could continue. But survival came at a cost he could not escape. On October 23, 1941, Bernhard Lichtenberg was arrested. The charge, abuse of the pulpit and prayer for Jews. A parishioner had informed on him. The Gestapo had been waiting for an excuse. Preysing fought for him. He wrote letters. He pulled connections. He tried to intervene. But the machinery of the Nazi state was implacable. Lichtenberg was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And when those 2 years ended, the Gestapo had new plans for him. In November 1943, Bernhard Lichtenberg was being transported to Dachau when he collapsed. His health, broken by imprisonment, gave out on a train to hell. He died on November 5, 1943. He was 68 years old. Preysing received the news in his residence. Witnesses later said they had never seen the bishop so shattered. Lichtenberg had been more than a subordinate. He had been a friend, a brother in resistance, a man whose courage illuminated what faithfulness truly meant. Now he was gone. And the bishop had to face a question that cuts to the heart of every leader in dark times. Was it worth it? Was the resistance worth the lives it cost? Should he have ordered Lichtenberg to be silent, to survive? He had no answer. Only the weight of grief and the knowledge that the work must continue. The network survived. Margarete Sommer kept rescuing. Other priests took up Lichtenberg's prayers, more quietly, more carefully. The bishop protected them as he had protected Lichtenberg. knowing now exactly what that protection might cost. The final years of the war were the most dangerous. As the Reich collapsed, the Nazi regime grew more savage. Deportations accelerated. The Gestapo, sensing its own approaching doom, lashed out at enemies old and new. Preysing walked a razor's edge. Every Sunday he preached, his words chosen with surgical precision. He condemned injustice without naming names. He defended human dignity without triggering immediate arrest. He knew the Gestapo monitored every syllable. He also knew that silence was complicity. In January 1945, he wrote a letter to Pope Pius XII that captured his anguish. We bishops are asked why the Church does not do something, why it does not help the persecuted. I see myself helpless, but I am not silent. He was never helpless, he was never silent, but he understood the limits of his power, even as he pushed those limits to their breaking point. April 1945. Berlin was dying. Soviet artillery shattered the city block by block. The Reich Chancellery, where Hitler cowered in his bunker, stood in ruins. The 1,000-year empire was ending in 12 years of madness and fire. And in the bishop's residence, Konrad von Preysing prayed. He had survived. His network had survived. Margarete Sommer was alive. Dozens of priests who had resisted were alive. Thousands of Jews who had found refuge through the Hilfswerk were alive. Not all, never all. The final solution had murdered 6 million, and no rescue network, no matter how brave, could have stopped that machinery of death. But some had lived. Some because a bishop had said yes when he could have said no. Some because an aristocrat had chosen conscience over safety. Some because a woman named Marguerite had forged one more document, found one more hiding place, made one more impossible decision. When the Soviet forces entered Berlin, they found a city in ashes. They also found a Catholic church, still standing, battered, grieving, but unbroken. Preysing faced a new challenge immediately. The Soviets were no friends of faith. The Cold War was beginning, and East Berlin would soon fall behind an iron curtain of its own. But that is another story. In February 1946, Pope Pius XII named Konrad von Preysing a cardinal. It was recognition not just of his office, but of his 12 years of resistance in the heart of darkness. He wore the red hat quietly. Those who knew him said he seemed tired, a weariness that went beyond age. He had carried too much for too long. He had buried too many friends. On December 21, 1950, Cardinal von Preysing died in Berlin. He was 69 years old. His legacy is not simple to summarize. He was not a martyr like Lichtenberg. He did not deliver thundering public sermons like Bishop von Galen in Münster. His resistance was quieter, more strategic, more institutional. He protected those who took the risks. He ensured the work could continue. He proved that a bishop could lead his diocese through 12 years of Nazi tyranny without collaboration, without surrender, without abandoning the people who depended on him. Years later, Margarete Sommer would be named Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem. The recognition was hers, but she always insisted. The bishop made it possible. Without his protection, there would have been no network. Without his authority, no safe houses. Without his courage, no cover for those who did the dangerous work. Some heroes stand in the spotlight. Others create the shadows where rescue can happen. Konrad von Preysing chose the shadows, not because he lacked courage, but because he understood that courage alone was not enough. Strategy, patience, institutional power, and unwavering moral clarity, these were his weapons. He wielded them for 12 years in the capital of evil. The question his life poses is not comfortable. It asks us, what does resistance look like when the enemy is everywhere? When every word is monitored? When heroism might get your friends killed? Preysing's answer was not a single dramatic act. It was 1,000 small decisions, made day after day, year after year, to protect this priest, to authorize this rescue, to write this letter, to preach this sermon, to refuse this compromise. It was the courage of endurance. In a city consumed by darkness, he kept a small flame burning, and when the darkness finally lifted, that flame remained. Some lights are never extinguished.